Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Coding with T. Today we are going to learn how to perform user create, read, update and delete operations using Firestore as a backend. Today's tutorial is going to be very informative and we are not just going to focus on create, read, update and delete data from the Firestore, but we will also make sure that everything that requires to handle data professionally should be covered in this tutorial. This tutorial is also not only focusing on the users who are following our e-commerce application, but it is a general tutorial. Anybody who is not even following the previous videos, then follow this and learn how to deal with the backend, which is the Firebase Firestore. So first of all, let's quickly have a look what we are going to create. Okay, so our application is running, and if user is logged in, and because user is logged in, you can see the screen, which is the home screen, only appears if the user is logged in. So at the top, first thing is you can see the name of the user. It's written over here. So this is the first thing we need to retrieve from the user data and display it right over here. When you head towards the profile, and in here there are two things, name and email of the user. And also in the next tutorial we will cover how to deal with the Firebase images and store it in the Firebase storage. So for today's tutorial, let's talk about the data. When you click on this edit profile, you will see all the list of the user data, how we can retrieve and place it over here. And also because Firestore charge you on basis of reads and writes, so we always have to try to go for the minimum reads and minimum writes whenever we are developing any application. So to reduce the number of reads and writes, we will also see how we can only fetch user record for the first time when application loads and keep the user record on all the screens to reduce number of reads. Then when user is going to click on any of the link, first of all change the name of the user, change it to Coding with T. When I'm going to save this, you will also be able to see that in the Firebase console. So I have opened the Firebase console, and currently you can see the first name and the last name are the old names. When I'm going to click on save and the data of first name and last name change, we can see the updated name over here. Also, if you head towards the home, you can see the updated name in the profile as well. Everywhere we have changed the name. Also, when you go to edit this profile, click on close account. This is going to delete the user account. Click on close account, it is going to show the pop-up. I'm going to click on delete. First, we have to re-authenticate user, because without re-authentication, we cannot delete the user. So let's add again email and password. Click on verify, it's processing, and if user is verified, it is going to remove. And you can see also the user account has been removed from here, from the Firestore. Add towards authentication. Okay, currently because we didn't refresh the authentication tab, so still we can see the support email. When I'm going to click on reload, and you can see it's gone. It's no longer inside our authentication. This means that user account is successfully created. And also when we are going to click on the sign in, you can see invalid login credentials. So this means that we again have to create account to use this user. So this is what we are going to learn today. So let's get started. If you are already following, you know that we are creating Flutter e-commerce application, and we have already completed the section 1, 2 and 3, in which we learn how to create project till we design the complete e-commerce application. Now in the fourth section, which is about to be completed, we learn how to perform the authentication, how to create authentication repository to redirect user on a relevant screens. And in today's tutorial, we are definitely going to talk about the user using Firestore. So let's go for the today's tutorial breakdown. First of all, we are going to learn exactly what is the class, how class can be used as a GetX controller, and why we are going to call a controller as a GetX controller, and why even we need to use the GetX controller instead of a simple class. After that, we are going to talk about the very basics in few minutes, what is Firebase collections and how it works. Then we're going to talk about the complete user repository, how to create user, remove user, add, update, delete, everything. Then we are going to get the user data from the Firestore only once and reuse that throughout in our application, so that we can avoid reads as much as we can. After that, we will learn how to update the user data and definitely how to remove the user data. So let's get started with today's tutorial. Open Android Studio, and we are inside our project. Previous tutorial we learned how to send a reset password email, and also resend email again for the reset password or the forget password. So let's close this. As you can see over here that while creating any class, I extend that class with the GetX controller. So why even we need the GetX controller? So let's talk about this. Let's assume that we don't have any controller currently. So let's remove the controller. Okay, so currently we have a simple class with a simple name. As for today's tutorial, let's name it user class. Inside this class, there can be two things, either variables and functions, or both, or even one. Class contains variables and functions, right? To use that class variables and functions wherever we want, maybe on a button trigger, maybe we want this variable to be used somewhere else, we have to create a new instance of that class, right? To create a new instance, we use the new keyword and we create an instance. So what does happen when we create a new instance? Basically, when we are dealing with everything on application, on the website, at the back end, we are dealing with the memory, right? We are writing something in the memory, zeros and ones, and we are reading from the memory, which is zeros and ones. When we create a new instance, same thing happens. We create a new copy of the same data and add that into the memory. So let's say we have 10 to 20 instances of this class, or we have 10 to 20 places we are using this user class inside application. This means that we have to create 10 to 20 new instances, and definitely it is going to take the space of 10 to 20 instances whenever we are going to call the new instance, or whenever it is going to create a new instance in the memory. Then only we can use the variables and the functions. We can do everything without using GetX, but why even we need to write extend with the GetX controller? So by extending GetX, what happens is we are going to allow GetX library to add some more functionalities or wrap our class with some more functionalities using GetX. Now after this GetX, we can create instance. Instead of creating new name of the class, we can simply create get.put and name of the class. This is doing the very same thing, creating a new instance, nothing else. But instead of recreating instances again and again, whenever we are going to call next time get.find instead of calling get.put, which is going to find the already created instance of the user class from the memory, and we are going to use that same instance wherever we want to use. So by this way, definitely we are saving a lot of space, a lot of memory, speeding up the process. And now the reason to explain everything is very simple, that whenever we create a new instance of the class, there are few default override methods that run. The first one is the onReady method, second one is the onInit method, and the same way when we are going to destroy it or remove it from the memory, onClose and onDestroy may be called. So these are the few functions. They are in the cycle of the class. So I hope you understand a bit about classes. I am creating get.find over here. So what does it's doing? If we take a simple class which has a static keyword at the backend, or let's say we have this screen redirect function and I'm going to make it static. What does this mean? That now I cannot use anything or any variable from here. Everything should be inside this function. And once this method is static, without creating a new instance of this class, I am directly going to call authentication repository dot screen redirect and it should work. But again, the dependency is that we cannot use the variables, because variables can only be accessed using the new keyword, which is to create a new instance. Now head back over here at the top, you can see it's a static getter method, a method which is only return something. The name of the method is the instance, and inside the method you can create curly brackets over here and return get.find from here. But using a single line fat arrows, we are returning get.find, which is going to find instance of this authentication repository for us. And using the same approach, when you head towards the main.dart, we initialize the Firebase, and once the Firebase is initialized, we create the first instance using get.put of authentication repository. Whenever that is created in the authentication repository, onReady method will automatically be triggered, because authentication repository created for the first time, and whatever is inside this authentication onReady method will be executed and we landed to the relevant screen. So same for the, let's go to data, go to repositories, and inside we have a user repository we created while storing the data inside user record. When we created the email and password authentication, also store data inside the Firestore. In that we created only one function. That function's task is to save the user record. Open the Firebase console, and in here you can see inside the Firebase Firestore database, the first thing is the collection, right? So database starts from here. So we need to call any collection. Then inside this collection we have list of documents, and each document contain list of data. We can again create another collection inside this document, then again a document, then again a collection, again a document. So this way we can keep extending as much as we can. So this is how Firestore works. And using the same approach, we created the Firestore instance. It is pointing towards our database, which is the Firestore database. And using this variable we call collection. Name of the collection is users. Then document is user ID, which is this one. We retrieve the user ID right from here when we authenticated user or stored user inside our authentication. And using this ID, we can easily store all the data and retrieve all the data using the user UID. So same way we are going to implement all the functions. We're going to fetch user details based on user ID, function to update user data, and rest of all are same. We have already talked about all these custom exceptions. So if you're new, you can watch the previous videos. So let me copy this function and replace it for all of them. In here, again, to get the user details, I have created a function, fetch user details, and inside you have to first call the await sign because it's a cloud query, so it might take some time. So using the DB, which is Firebase Firestore dot instance dot call the collection again, collection of users, because we want to get the data of this user. And inside this document, we have to tell that which document data we want to retrieve, right? To retrieve a document of one specific user, we have to define ID of this document because while storing data, if you head toward the sign up controller, after checking everything, we first try to authenticate user using register with email and password, pass the email and password, and we get the user credentials, which is the authenticated user, and using user.uid, we get this UID and store that UID inside the user model. And again, we have a rest of the data of the user and pass this new user to save user record function, which is this one, which receives the user. And again, you see user.id is the document ID while creating this new user. So once we set this ID, now we need again that new ID to get the user record. So for that, we have to again head towards the authentication repository, and inside you can see we have Firebase Firestore instance already created, and using authentication.current user we can get the currently logged in user details. So instead of again calling Firebase Firestore inside every class, why not we create a simple getter method. I have created a user type. When you hover over this user, you can see this user is the Firebase auth user. So we need this user with the get method. I am just returning authentication, which is the Firebase auth.instance dot current user. It is going to return us the current active user using this authentication user. So head back over here inside this document. Now we are going to call our authentication repository dot instance. So again, this instance is already created first time. Now it is just going to find that instance, and using that instance we can easily call our auth user dot uid because auth user can be null. So add a question mark. Now it is going to get us the UID, and using that UID we can easily be able to call the user. And there are two methods to get the data from the Firestore. The first one is the get method. When you hover over this, it is going to return a document snapshot. So document snapshot means that because we are using this document, so that's why it's going to return us a specific document snapshot. And when you hover this again, you can see it is returning map of string and dynamic because Firebase always return data into JSON format, and we also have to store data by converting that data into JSON format. And in the Dart, JSON is called map because first one is key, which is always a string, and then second one is a value, which is dynamic. So once we receive this document snapshot, first we check that if there is anything in the document snapshot, we will convert that document snapshot using user model because we have to map that JSON format into the model we are using, which is a user model. And I have created a function which is from snapshot and pass the JSON to this function. Inside this user model, which has list of values, we have to first convert while storing into a JSON format. So toJSON method is going to help us get all these values and map those values using the curly brackets, as first value is a string, which is a key, and then we have the value, which is the user model data. It is going to convert it into the JSON format, and we can store that data into the Firebase. And using this function, which is the from snapshot, you can see we receive the document snapshot and we receive the JSON, which is map. So first we are going to check if document data not is equal to null, means if there is anything inside this data. If there is not, we are going to simply return the user model which has empty method. Actually, we are simply returning all these values with the empty data from here. And if there is any data, just get that data into this, and data of value. This is how we can retrieve data from the JSON. Data of first name, last name, username. Make sure these all values should be perfectly match with the values when you are storing this. If this value and this value is not same, this is not going to fetch data. So make sure these two should be same, and these double question mark means that whenever this value is going to be empty, we want to store empty text over here inside the first name instead of null. So once created, we're going to return this. You can see we can return the future model. We can use this whenever we want. Next, the update user details. To update the user data, we again have to use .toJSON method, which is going to convert our new data into JSON format. And using updated user model, we have to call collection of users .document. Again, we have to pass the user ID .update function and pass the updated JSON. Next, to update a single field of user, we are going to simply pass the JSON directly to this function, and it is going to store that JSON. And again, in the document, we have to call same authentication. So go to users, go to this document, and use the update function to pass the JSON. And also, if we want to remove the data, we just have to call again the same collection .document, pass the document ID which we want to delete, because in the document we have a list of data. So by deleting this document, everything will be deleted. So make sure to add try catch as well. So once this authentication repository is completed, sorry, user repository is completed, let's close this data as well, go to personalization controller, and we have a user controller over here. Previously, user controller was only handling one function, which is going to store user record. And what is the main purpose of the user controller is to manage the design as well as the backend. So now let's try to fetch the user record. When I'm going to open the shop, and inside the screens, we have a home screen. So this is the first screen on which we want to display the user record on the home app bar. Now inside this app bar, whenever this class is going to be created for the first time, we want to get the data from the Firestore. Then we want to reuse that data wherever we want. So inside this class, I'm going to call final controller, because controller has to handle everything. So controller is equal to get dot put means create a new instance, so that we can trigger the on init method user controller. So now this user controller will be triggered for the first time whenever the home screen appears. Now using this controller, we can easily replace the subtitle, which is the dummy data. You can see the dummy name over here. So we want to replace this text with actual user. So first we have to open this controller, and we have to call get the user so that we can use it. So I'm going to press Control O to override right on init method. Make sure to add super dot on init, and after this, call a fetch user record function and create that function over here. Fetch user record function, this is going to fetch the user record, and it has a try catch. So first of all, we need to create a new variable, a user variable, which will be assigned a dummy user or user model dot empty for the first time, and it has dot obs class. And you can see its return type is user model, but rx type of user model. So what does this means? Because using GetX, we can create a user which retains its state and also help us to update the front end whenever needed. So this OBS means that now this user is going to be observable. So someone is going to observe this user, and whenever there is change inside this user, it is going to redraw the design for us and work like a set state method for the stateful widgets. So if there is any change in the user model right over here, we want to redraw this on the design. So that's why we have to make this OBS, and return type will be RX. So now we want to assign this user model actual data whenever this function will be executed for the first time, and reuse this user throughout our application. So for that, we have to use this user repository inside. So let's get this data. First call the wait sign, and then use user repository dot fetch user details. This function is going to return the user details of this currently logged in user. And to assign this user, we have to call this dot user and pass the user we have just created. So this dot user means the user we have at the top, RX user, and this is the current data of the user. So we are going to pass the current user details to this one, and once assigned, we can easily use this user throughout in our application. And in the catch, if this is not the case, we are going to make sure that this user should be assigned as empty data. Now, once this operation is done, let's head towards the home app bar where we want to display the user details using the user controller. Whenever this is going to be called first time, this on init method will be triggered and it is going to fetch the record and pass the record to this user. So once this new instance will be created using this controller, we can easily replace the subtitle and pass our controller dot user dot to get the value of the user, which is rx. We use dot value dot, we have to display the first name and also the last name as a combination. So instead we are going to use the full name attribute, which is simply combining the first name and last name and returning the full name to us. So we are going to use this full name and it is going to display the full name for us. So let's run this application. Always run in the debug mode. Okay, so our application is running and you cannot see the name. What is the reason? We displayed the name, we call the user controller for the first time. Okay, so issue is that currently when you head towards this controller, you can see it is using a wait sign, and the first time when we're calling this user, it has the empty data and it displays the empty data with no record of this user, right? So after few seconds, maybe few milliseconds, depends on the internet, the data arrive using this await call, data arrive, and now we want to reload the state of the user using this user.obs. So to do that, we have to wrap this text with a widget, which is obx widget, which is the observer itself, which is going to observe and change the state of this design. It has a function. So using this function, we have to return a widget. So widget is the text widget. Now, whenever this user is going to be changed, it is going to redraw automatically by its own. So because this user is the type of Rx, so that's why it is going to detect this user. Whenever there is change, it is going to redraw this. So let me refresh this screen. And now you can see the name appears. Now to add a loader in case the value is being fetched and you want to display a loader over here, in here we can create a new profile loading is equal to false, a boolean variable which is also observable, and inside this, whenever this function is going to be called, we want to start this profile loading dot value is equal to true. So this dot value is going to extract exactly because it's a boolean type, so we are going to get this boolean using this dot value, and rest once it's initialized we are going to make this boolean to false. You can also use finally over here and only call this false once, remove it from here. So start this and in the finally remove the loader because this is also observable. So now inside this controller, we can wrap this text. Instead of directly displaying the text, we can add a check or a if statement. So instead of a single function, now we can wrap this with a function like this, and now we have to return this text. So first we are going to check if controller dot profile loading dot value is true. If it is true, this means that we have to return a loader, which is a T shimmer loader. So if you head towards this class, this is a custom class I've created, which has a simple shimmer effect. When you go to PubSpec to use this, you have to import this library. And in here you can see it's a shimmer dot from colors. Base color is this one, then highlight color is this one. Then in the child, I'm going to create a container with the width and height. Then a box decoration is going to add color and definitely a border radius. So to use this, we are going to head towards this one and add width and height, which is 15. Width has 80. It is going to add a nice loader, and else if profile loading is completed, we simply want to return the text from here. You can also add if full name is not null, you can display some other message, and if it contains something, you can display it right over here. So let me just rerun this so that we can see the loader. Okay, so our application is running again and you can see data appears, but because it's in a blink of seconds, so that's why we cannot actually see the loader, but nothing to worry about. We'll cover that in upcoming videos. Okay, so that's it for the home app bar. Now head towards the profile, and using the same approach, we are going to replace this app bar also. To replace that, go to screens, inside the settings, open the settings dart, and at the top you can see we have a custom widget which is T user profile tile. Inside this widget we are going to do the same approach, but instead of creating get.put again, we can simply call user controller dot instance. So this instance is going to call the get.find and return the already created instance. So using this controller, we can replace the title and subtitle. So call controller dot user dot value dot full name as a name, copy and replace the email as well and change the full name to email. That's it. We will replace the image in the next tutorial. So let's save this, and you can see the email is being changed, but it's not currently visible. So let's try to click on this edit and change all these values from here. So this is inside the profile in the profile.dart. You can see we have the default values in front of name, username, email, and list is keep on going. So let's copy the instance again. Inside this build function, we have to create a controller instance, and using this controller, we can easily replace not the image, but let's try to replace the name. So I've replaced all these values, full name, username, then we have the ID if you want to display the ID, then we have email and phone number. Currently we don't have gender and date of birth. So let's save the code and you can see everything is changed. We have a username, we have name, then we have the user ID, then we have email and phone number. Now we want to update this. So whenever we're going to click on this name, it should open the new form with the two fields. So whenever this full name is going to be pressed, we are going to redirect to the new screen, which is the change name screen, which is only containing the two form fields. The first one is heading, then in the form it has one text form field for the first name and one text form field for the last name. And you can see the controllers and the validator. Also, validator is going to validate the empty text. We have already covered in-depth tutorial about form handling in the registration screen, which you can get from the same playlist. Link is in the description. So to save the time, we are not going to go into these details again. Now, first of all, let's click on this first name and you can see we have redirected to the next screen with the first name and last name already assigned. So when you scroll it bit up inside, you can see we have already created a controller. Text form field, first and last text form field, both have already assigned the first name and last name. How we can do that? And inside you can see you've created a new controller and created a new instance of this controller using get.put, which is update name controller. So let's open this. We first have to create the two text editing controllers, first name and last name for two text fields. Then we have a user controller using again user controller.instance. We have a user repository for update data, and then we have a form key for the form. And again, the same approach, whenever this instance will be created, onInit method will be triggered. And using this onInit method, we are going to simply initialize these two text fields with the data of this user controller dot user dot first name and last name. So this way we can see already assigned data to these two fields. Now inside this chain name form, whenever this save button will be pressed, controller dot update username will be triggered this function inside the update name controller. So the first thing we're going to trigger the loading, then we're going to check the internet. Again, these all things are in detail covered in the previous tutorials. If you're new, you can watch the previous tutorials. Start any loader, check the internet connection, perform the form validation, if form is validated or not. If it is not, simply return. Then over here, we are going to create a JSON which we want to update, and inside the user repository, we're going to call this function which is update single field that we just created inside our user repository. And as this is going to require a JSON file, so we have to provide inside the users collection, inside the user document, update this JSON. So this JSON is only going to change the values of this document which we are going to pass. So head back to update controller, update name controller. In here, we first have to create a JSON, a name JSON. JSON will always be inside the curly brackets. So first value should again be string. It's a first name. Value of the first name will be extracted from this text form field. Last name will also be extracted from this text form field. And using the user repository dot update single field will be called, and we are going to pass the JSON over here. It is going to save the record or update the record. Once this data is updated, we also have to update our user, which we created in the user controller. User dot value dot first name will be first name dot text, last name will be last name dot text, and this is how we can update the user. Remove this loader, show a success message that data has been updated, and then move to the previous screen. Also in the catch, whenever there is an exception, we are going to stop the loading and displaying error message. You can also use get.off. Using get.off, you can redirect to the previous screen. So now let's try to change the last name to coding with T. Press on save. It's processing, and you can see your name has been updated. And also you can see coding with WOT, which means that our name of this user has been updated. When you head towards the profile, you can also see the coding with T also updated over here, and in the home you can see coding with T is also updated. Now it's time to learn how to delete the user account on this close account button. To delete the user account, we first have to create a function which is going to trigger a pop-up for the user that when user is going to press on that button, a pop-up should appear that should be a warning pop-up that deleting this, there is no returning back, everything will be removed. So after that, to delete the account using Firebase, we have to re-authenticate user again. This is the requirement of the Firebase. So for that, we have to again create verify email and verify password text editing controllers, and also a form key that is going to be re-authenticate form key. So if you head towards this widget, I have already created this login form, which is the re-authenticate user. It has a simple form with that key and the first text field for the email, second text field for the password, and also it has hide password. If you don't know what this all about, you can watch our login tutorial or the registration tutorial to know in depth about all these things. And down below over here, the first function that I'm going to create is the delete account warning pop-up. It is going to use simple a default dialog, and in the content padding add some padding, add a title, middle title, and on the confirmation button we are going to simply call the delete user account we have created right over here. It has some styles, and on the cancel button we are simply going to close that pop-up using navigator.context.pop. It is going to close that pop-up, right? So when this delete user account will be triggered, this function will be called. This function again going to start loading, and we are going to use the authentication repository again, because inside that authentication repository we have to get the current user provider. So what does provider means? If you head towards the authentication inside over here, you can see these are the two type of providers, right? So Facebook, email and password, phone number authentication, Gmail, Google, whatever it is, it will be called as a provider. So there can be two or more providers. So this means that we have to loop through all the providers data. So I have received the provider over here, which is the first provider of this user. You can get it using the authentication repository or Firebase auth.instance.current user dot provider data dot map. This is going to return the provider ID. So using this provider ID, if it is not empty, we are going to check if provider is equal to google.com. Password means if it is email and password authentication. Same way for the Facebook, you can use facebook.com. If it is google.com, we are going to simply call authentication again and sign in with Google method that we have already implemented. And then we are going to call authenticate dot delete account. It should be a wait because these are the cloud queries. Then we have to stop loading and redirect back to login screen. Else, if it is not the case with the Google, it is email and password authentication, then we are going to stop the loading and open a new form on which user should have to re-authenticate itself first, and after that we are going to delete the account, right? So the form we have already created, we have already discussed. Whenever this form will be saved or submitted, we are going to call controller.reauthenticate form email and password. It is again inside the same user controller next to this delete user account function, which is right over here. So this function will be triggered. It will again start loading, check the internet, and perform the authentication of the form. If everything is validated, it will also use the authentication repository and call this function, which is re-authenticate with email and password. If it is going to authenticate it, there is no exception. This means the user is authenticated. Now we can delete the user, right? Now we have to see these two functions. So first let's talk about the re-authenticate user, which is inside this authentication repository. We have to pass the email and password at the top. If you follow the tutorials, you know that to use the login with email, we also have to pass email and password, and we have to call firebase authentication dot instance dot sign in with email and password. Same firebase instance dot create user with email and password. And just like that, we again have to call email auth provider dot credential, pass the email and password. And if it is going to return the credential, we're going to use Firebase auth dot current user, which is currently logged in, dot re-authenticate with credentials. So we have to pass these credentials. And if it is not going to throw any exception, this means that the authentication has been completed. And once this authentication is completed, we are simply going to delete the account, which is also inside the authentication repository. To delete the user account, we first have to call user repository.instance, because we have to delete two things over here. User is authenticated. Now we can delete the Firestore and also the authentication data. So first remove user record will be called in the user repository, and it is going to simply call user collection, document ID of the current user, and then delete. If you're going to delete authentication user first, then you will not be able to get this user ID and this record will not be deleted. So make sure to delete the Firestore record first using the authenticated user ID, then delete it. After that, call the authentication, which is again firebase auth.instance. So using that Firebase auth.instance, get the current user, call the delete method, and it is going to remove the user for us. So let's try it again. Inside the profile.dart, when this close account button will be triggered, we have to call our controller dot delete account warning pop-up. This is going to open a pop-up message. If user confirm this pop-up, it is going to call the next function, which is delete user account, and it is going to simply check that if user is logged in using Google or logged in using password, email and password, do it accordingly because our user is using email and password. So it's a requirement. We first have to re-authenticate user. If user re-authenticated using this form, it will be automatically deleted everything. So let's try it. Let's refresh the code. Okay, so our application is running. Let's head to profile and also let me open the Google console. Inside you can see we have currently logged in with this email, which is support at coding with T. And also if we see this data, so this is the data with the last name updated. So let's try to head towards the profile, click on close account. We can see the pop-up. So when we're going to click on this cancel, it is going to remove it. But when we are going to click on this delete button, you can see it opens re-authenticate user because we are logged in using email and password. So let's give it email and password. Click on verify. It is processing. And you can see the record has been removed from this user. So let's head toward over here and also let me refresh this authentication, and you can see the support email is also deleted because this is a very important and crucial part to upload your apps on the Play Store. From now onwards, you have to make sure that your data of the user should be deleted, otherwise Play Store is going to reject your app and you will not be able to upload it. So I hope you learned something new. That's it for today's tutorial. You can get the complete code. Link is in the description. If you learned something new, please like the video. And if you're new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified for all the upcoming changes. Once again, thank you for watching. Take care. Allah Hafiz.